Everyone seems to be waiting for the same thing, a housing market crash. Over the last few months, I've heard people say, just wait, prices are going to come down. Sellers are getting desperate. So when I opened the June housing report, I wanted to see if the numbers actually supported that. And honestly, one thing surprised me. Not prices, not inventory, buyer demand. Because despite higher mortgage rates and affordability challenges, more people bought homes in June than they did a year ago. So today, let's talk about what actually happened in Florida's housing market, and more importantly, what it means if you're thinking about buying or selling. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Francisco Cabrera, Realtor and Mortgage Loan Officer here in South Florida. Every month, I take the latest Florida Realtors data and answer one simple question. What is the market actually telling us? Because numbers by themselves don't help you make better decisions. Understanding the story behind those numbers does. So let's dive in. The first thing that jumped out at me was demand. Despite mortgage rates staying higher than most buyers would like, more homes sold in June than they did a year ago. That tells me buyers haven't disappeared, they've adapted. Instead of waiting for the perfect interest rate, they're focusing on finding a payment that they can comfortably afford. They're negotiating seller credits. They're asking for closing cost assistance. They're shopping more carefully, but they're still buying. And honestly, that's exactly what I've been seeing with my own clients. The conversation has shifted from, should I wait, to how do I make today's market work for me? That's a very different mindset. Now, here's what surprised me even more. If buyer activity increases, most people would assume inventory would also increase. But instead, it went the other direction. Florida had fewer homes available than it did a year ago. Months of inventory also declined. And why is that important? Because real estate is driven by supply and demand. When demand stays healthy while supply gets tighter, prices usually remain stable. And that's exactly what we saw this month. And that brings us to prices. Florida's median home price increased nearly 5% year over year. Now, 5% isn't the crazy appreciation we saw during the pandemic. And honestly, that's a good thing. A healthier market isn't one where prices jump 20% every year. It's one where buyers and sellers both have opportunities. Today's buyers have more negotiating power. Today's sellers are still benefiting from solid demand. That's a much more balanced market than we've seen in years. And Florida is a big state. So let's zoom into South Florida. And what's interesting, each county has its own personality. And Miami continues doing what Miami usually does. Demand stays strong. Sales increased. Inventory tightened. Prices continued moving higher. That's not a market showing signs of panic. It's a market where buyers are still willing to compete for well-priced homes. Broward was probably the biggest surprise for me. Sales jumped more than 26% year over year. Inventory declined and prices remained stable. To me, that's one of the healthiest reports we've seen in quite some time. Now, does that mean every home sells immediately? No. But buyers today are much more informed. If a home is overpriced, they move on. But if it's priced correctly, it's still generating strong activity. That's exactly what I've been experiencing with my own clients here in Broward. But Palm Beach County continues showing impressive strength. It had the highest median price of the three counties. Sales increased substantially. Inventory tightened even further. Out of the three counties, Palm Beach currently has the tightest housing supply. And that's one of the reasons prices have continued performing so well there. So, what should buyers and sellers take away from all of this? If you're buying, I wouldn't spend all my energy trying to predict the perfect market. Think about what's happened over the last few years. When rates were low, competition was intense. Today, rates are higher, but inspections are back. Seller concessions are common, and buyers have room to negotiate again. There's almost always a trade-off. If you're financially ready, focus less on timing the market and more on buying the right home at a payment you're comfortable with. Now, if you're selling, the good news is demand is still healthy. But today's buyers expect value. They're comparing your home to every other listing before they ever schedule a showing. That means pricing strategy matters more today than it did 2 or 3 years ago. The sellers having the most success aren't necessarily asking for the highest price. They're asking for the right price. If there's one thing I'll be watching next month, it's inventory. If inventory continues to tighten while buyer demand stays steady, prices will likely continue showing resilience. If inventory starts building again, buyers may have a little bit more of negotiating power. That's the number I'll be paying closest attention to. If there's one lesson from June, it's this: the market isn't crashing, it's adapting. Buyers are adapting, sellers are adapting, and the housing market is finding a healthier balance than we've seen in several years. That's why I always encourage people to ignore the headlines and pay attention to the data, because the data tells a much better story. If you're wondering what these numbers mean for your neighborhood, your buying power, or your home's value, I'd be happy to help. Leave your questions in the comments. I read every single one of them, and many of the future videos come directly from your suggestions. If you found this update helpful, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe. Every month, I'll break down the latest Florida housing data and explain what it actually means without all the hype. I'm Francisco Cabrera, and remember, the best real estate decisions aren't made from headlines. They're made from understanding the data. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.